In April 1912, the world saw the greatest ship ever built, Titanic. They called it unsinkable. But hidden behind its shining lights were secrets too dark to reveal. That night, when Titanic sailed into the Atlantic, it carried more than passengers, it carried a truth the world was never meant to know. April 10, 1912. The night before Titanic's great voyage. The ship stood in the harbor, the pride of human engineering, shining with hundreds of lights against the dark sky. People looked at it with wide eyes, calling it the unsinkable ship. It was more than just a vessel, it was a dream of power, wealth, and human achievement. But behind the celebration, there was silence. A silence that hid something darker, something the world was never told. Crowds gathered around Titanic. Some passengers smiled with excitement, ready for the journey of their lives. They spoke about the grand halls, the fine food, the luxury no ship had ever given before. Yet in the shadows of the docks, a few men stood apart. They whispered among themselves, glancing at the ship with uneasy eyes. They were not excited. They were afraid. Records show that several wealthy and powerful men had booked their tickets on Titanic, but suddenly cancelled at the last moment. Their reasons were unclear. Some claimed illness, others gave no reason at all. The truth was never explained. What did they know? Why did they stay behind while others sailed into history? Inside the ship, workers hurried to prepare for departure. The crew carried luggage, food, and supplies. But among the normal cargo, there were sealed crates, crates never listed on the public records. Some crew members asked about them, but they were told to stay silent. Whatever was inside, it was not meant for curious eyes. Titanic was not just carrying passengers. It carried secrets. Among the passengers boarding that night were millionaires, businessmen, politicians, and even mysterious strangers whose names do not appear in official records today. Some were there for business, others for pleasure, but a few seemed to be watching everything around them. Survivors later said they felt uneasy, as if some people were guarding something important. The excitement of the passengers could not hide the strange atmosphere. Some felt it, some ignored it. But the truth was there. Something was not right. Journalists wrote about the grand voyage, calling it the safest journey across the Atlantic. Yet not everyone believed. In the taverns and streets near the harbor, rumors spread. People whispered that the ship was cursed, that building such a massive vessel was a challenge to nature itself. Others claimed Titanic was not just a ship, it was a trap. No one knew where these rumors began, but they were spoken in hushed voices, as if even the walls should not hear. On the docks, families said goodbye. Some cried, some waved with joy, believing they would see their loved ones again soon. Among them was a mother who refused to board, holding her child close. She had a ticket, but something stopped her. She later told a friend, "I saw the ship, and my heart told me not to go." She lived. The ship carried her empty cabin across the ocean. That night, as Titanic prepared to leave, the sound of its horns echoed through the city. Lights shimmered on the water, and the air was filled with excitement. But deep inside the hearts of a few, fear remained. Survivors later said that some passengers walked the decks in silence, as if they knew the ship's fate before it even left port. Some people claimed to have dreams before boarding, dreams of cold water and sinking ships. They ignored them, believing it was only fear of the sea. But after the tragedy, those dreams became chilling memories. As the last luggage was carried aboard, the ship stood ready. It was massive, almost alive, and it waited like a giant beast prepared to move into the dark waters. The world watched with pride, but the ocean remained still, as if waiting too. Some said the sea itself seemed uneasy that night. Midnight approached. The crew worked in silence. Lights glowed in every window. The ship looked perfect, untouched by doubt. Yet somewhere within those glowing halls, behind the music and laughter, shadows waited. Secrets were hidden in locked rooms, in cargo holds, in the hearts of those who knew more than they spoke. People would later ask, how could such a ship sink? How could the unsinkable fall? But that night, no one could imagine what was coming. History would tell one story. Survivors would tell another. And the truth, the real truth, would remain buried beneath waves and silence. Titanic was ready to leave, but with it, it carried not just passengers and dreams, it carried mysteries that still haunt the world more than a century later. The ship moved slowly into the dark, and the secrets of April 10, 1912, went with it. And so began a journey that was never meant to end. The Titanic moved across the cold waters, a floating palace filled with people from every walk of life. It was not just a ship, it was a world on the sea. Inside its golden halls, passengers laughed, dined, and admired the beauty around them. But behind the music and elegance, there were stories the world was not told. Stories of passengers who boarded with secrets that would never reach the shore. Some of the richest men in the world were on board. Millionaires like John Jacob Astor and Benjamin Guggenheim had taken their places in the first-class cabins, living in pure luxury. Their cabins were like royal rooms, filled with fine furniture and shining lamps. But even their presence carried whispers. Some said these men carried documents, plans, or information that was never meant to be made public. Some said enemies had followed them onto the ship, hiding among the crowd of ordinary passengers. Others said the Titanic was chosen for more than a voyage, it was chosen to remove certain men from history. While the wealthy enjoyed their meals of caviar and wine, far below in third class, families huddled together. Men, women, and children carried only a few belongings, hoping to start a new life in America. Their cabins were small, crowded, and plain, but their hearts were full of hope. Among them were people whose names history forgot. Yet some of these unknown passengers seemed unusual. They kept to themselves, avoided conversations, and carried bags that were never opened in front of others. Survivors would later say they seemed to watch the ship itself, walking through corridors at night, checking doors, listening to whispers. What were they looking for? What were they protecting? As the ship sailed, strange events unfolded. Some passengers reported seeing men speaking quietly with crew members in corners of the dining hall. Others claimed to have seen sealed envelopes being passed hand to hand. The official records never mentioned these things, but survivors remembered. And those memories became part of the mystery. In the smokerooms, where men gathered to play cards and drink, conversations turned to politics and power. Some spoke about wars, banks, and empires. But some voices lowered when the talk turned to the cargo. Rumors spread that Titanic was carrying more than fine goods. Some believed gold, some believed secret machinery, and some even whispered about military plans hidden below deck. The truth was locked away in the cargo hold, and no one could confirm it. But the fear was there, growing. In the evenings, when the music played and couples danced under crystal lights, a few passengers walked in silence. They did not smile, they did not drink. Their eyes moved across the room, always watching. Survivors later recalled a woman in a black coat who always sat alone, staring at the windows as if she expected something. They never knew her name, and she was never seen again after the sinking. Some said she vanished before the iceberg, taken away by lifeboat. Others believed she went down with the ship, her secret dying with her. There were also strange behaviors among the crew. Some sailors spoke of strict orders, telling them not to ask questions about certain areas of the ship. Locked doors, guarded storage rooms, and crates marked with strange codes were off limits. One crew member later whispered to a friend, "This ship carries more than passengers. We are guarding something we cannot speak of." But that crew member did not survive the night of April 14th. Perhaps the strangest part of all was the number of passengers who never should have been there. Survivors told of people whose names never appeared on the official passenger list. Some traveled under false names, others with no records at all. Who were they? Were they spies, agents, or simply lost in the chaos of history? Their identities were never explained. Some survivors believed these shadowy passengers were the key to Titanic's mystery. In the great dining room, laughter echoed each evening. Men toasted their fortunes, women admired the beauty of the ship, and children ran across the polished floors. It looked perfect, a picture of happiness. Yet beneath that glittering surface, fear and secrets grew. Some passengers looked over their shoulders, some kept journals hidden under their pillows, some whispered warnings to their friends. A few even predicted the ship would never reach America. They spoke softly, but their words carried weight. Something will happen. This voyage will not end well. The passengers of Titanic were more than names on a list. They were part of a story far larger than anyone imagined. Some boarded with dreams, some with wealth, some with hope. But others boarded with secrets, and those secrets went down with the ship. The question that remains is this: were these people simply victims of an accident, or were they part of a plan? Were they chosen to be on Titanic, or did they choose it for reasons never revealed? As the ship sailed further into the Atlantic, the passengers lived their lives, unaware that history was closing in. But among them were eyes that knew, hands that carried forbidden things, and minds that feared what was coming. And when the iceberg struck, those secrets sank beneath the waves, buried with the voices that could have told the truth. The Titanic was more than a ship of dreams. It was a ship of secrets. And the passengers who boarded that fateful day carried with them stories the world was never meant to know. The Titanic sailed forward into the cold Atlantic waters, its lights glowing against the endless night. To the passengers, the journey seemed smooth and safe. The ship was grand, the music was sweet, and the air was filled with laughter. But behind this beauty, a series of strange warnings began to appear. Warnings that were ignored, hidden, or simply forgotten. Some believed these warnings were accidents, while others believed they were deliberate, as if someone wanted the ship to meet its fate. Days before the collision, messages had already been sent to the Titanic. Ships in the area had reported icebergs floating in dangerous clusters. Wireless operators transmitted alerts, urging caution. Yet many of these messages were set aside, never reaching the captain's eyes. Some were delayed, others mysteriously disappeared. The Titanic's operators were busy sending personal telegrams for wealthy passengers, and the warnings were pushed aside. Was it negligence? Or was someone making sure those warnings never mattered? Survivors later recalled overhearing conversations among crew members who seemed uneasy. One steward admitted that the ship had received more than 3 warnings in a single day. But when asked why nothing was done, he said quietly, "We were told to keep course. No changes." Who gave that order? Why did the captain ignore the danger? These questions remain unanswered, lost in the silence of history. Some passengers themselves noticed unusual signs. On the 3rd evening, a second-class passenger wrote in her diary that she overheard 2 officers speaking in hushed voices about ice ahead. She noted their tone. It was not casual, it was serious. But when she asked them directly, they brushed her aside and smiled, telling her not to worry. That diary was later recovered from her belongings after the sinking. It stood as a chilling piece of evidence that the crew knew more than they admitted. Even stranger were the stories of mysterious figures spotted on the ship. Several passengers claimed to have seen men in officer uniforms who did not appear in the official crew list. These men were seen near the bridge at odd hours, whispering with the wireless operators. Some passengers thought they were extra crew brought for training. Others believed they were there for another reason, to ensure that the ship sailed into danger. The warnings were not only about ice. Some survivors remembered overhearing sailors talking about strange signals received from unknown sources. Short, coded transmissions were picked up on the wireless, but the operators never explained them. One crew member later confessed to his wife before leaving Southampton that the wireless room was too busy with secrets. After the sinking, that confession became part of the legend. As the Titanic sailed further into icy waters, the temperature dropped. Some passengers complained of the freezing air on deck. They spoke of an unnatural silence in the ocean. One man said, "It was as if the sea was waiting." Still, the ship pressed forward at high speed. Why did the captain push the ship so fast in dangerous waters? Historians argue about it, but survivors always wondered if there was pressure from someone else. Someone powerful on board who wanted the ship to arrive early, no matter the risk. The mystery deepens when we consider the nearby ships. The Californian, only miles away, had already stopped due to thick ice. Its captain warned Titanic through repeated messages, but Titanic's wireless operators dismissed them as interruptions. The Californian waited, surrounded by ice, while Titanic sped into the darkness. Was this arrogance? Or was it planned? There are also reports of another ship, an unknown vessel, that sent no warnings but was seen on the horizon that night. Survivors swore they saw lights in the distance, a ship that seemed close but never came to help. Some believed it was watching. Others believed it was waiting for Titanic's fall. Why was it there? Why did it remain silent? The unanswered questions multiply. In the days leading to the disaster, certain passengers seemed unusually tense. A group of men in first class were said to have gathered secretly, holding private meetings in their cabins. They spoke little with others and kept their discussions hidden. One steward claimed he heard them speak the words insurance and risk before being ordered out of the room. If this is true, then perhaps Titanic's voyage was more than just a journey. Perhaps it was a stage for something much larger. The unusual warnings were not just messages from ships. Some came from the passengers themselves. Survivors told of dreams and premonitions that haunted them before boarding. One woman claimed she saw visions of a ship sinking in icy waters weeks before. Another man told his wife, "This ship will not complete its voyage." They boarded anyway, perhaps out of duty, perhaps out of disbelief. But their words came true. As the nights passed, the warnings increased. Ice reports grew urgent. The sea grew colder. Yet the ship never slowed. It never changed course. Some believe it was arrogance. Some believe it was fate. And some whisper that it was design, that Titanic was meant to sail into the trap laid before it. On April 14, 1912, the final warnings arrived. Multiple ships reported massive ice fields directly in Titanic's path. These were the last chances to save the ship. But the officers made their choice. Titanic continued at near full speed, cutting through the dark waters. Passengers laughed, danced, and slept in their beds, never knowing the danger that surrounded them. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of the ship, there were those who knew. They had read the warnings, heard the signals, seen the signs. And they understood that something terrible was coming. The tragedy of Titanic was not only the collision, it was the silence before. The warnings were there, but the truth was ignored, hidden, or erased. That is why so many believe that Titanic's end was not an accident. It was a mystery carefully wrapped in secrecy, carried across the ocean, and drowned with the ship when the waves finally claimed it. The night of April 14, 1912 was calm and quiet. The sky above Titanic was clear, filled with stars brighter than most passengers had ever seen. The sea lay still, like a sheet of black glass stretching to the horizon. To many, it felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. Passengers walked the decks in their coats, enjoying the sharp cold air. Some admired the stars, others joked about the chill, never imagining that in only hours the ocean would take them. The ship moved forward at nearly full speed, engines thundering deep below. In the dining rooms and lounges, the wealthy drank wine and played cards while music floated through the air. Children slept in their cabins. Couples whispered promises of their future in America. But beneath the calm, there was unease. Some passengers felt the strange silence of the sea, as if the ocean itself was waiting for something. Survivors later recalled that the air seemed heavy, filled with a kind of warning that no one understood until it was too late. At 11:40 p.m., the lookout in the crow's nest spotted something ahead. A dark shadow loomed against the stars. He rang the bell 3 times and shouted, "Iceberg, right ahead!" The warning echoed through the bridge. The officers reacted quickly, ordering the ship to turn. The great vessel shifted in the water, its massive body groaning as it tried to avoid the danger. Seconds later, the ship shuddered. A scraping sound tore across the hull, long and sharp, like metal against stone. But the passengers felt only a soft vibration, hardly noticeable to many. Some continued their games, their drinks, their laughter, unaware that history had just changed. The iceberg had struck. Or had it? Survivors later gave conflicting accounts. Some swore they saw a mountain of ice rise beside the ship, glowing faintly in the starlight. Others insisted they never saw an iceberg at all. They claimed the impact felt strange, not like striking solid ice, but more like an explosion or a tearing from within. These voices were ignored in official reports, but they remain part of Titanic's mystery. Down in the lower decks, water began to pour through broken plates of steel. The ship was wounded, its unsinkable claim already dying. The crew rushed to close watertight doors, but the damage stretched across too many compartments. The engineers knew within minutes, Titanic was doomed. Yet above deck, passengers remained calm. The officers told them it was nothing, only a small problem. They were urged to return to their cabins. The band continued to play, filling the air with gentle music to hide the growing fear. But whispers spread quickly. Some passengers noticed the tilt of the floors, the water dripping where it should not. Others saw crew members running with pale faces. They began to understand, but the truth was still hidden. Strange details added to the mystery of that night. Some survivors reported hearing muffled booms deep in the ship, as if something exploded after the impact. Others claimed the iceberg looked unnatural, too sharp, too dark, as though it appeared out of nowhere. A few even suggested it was not an iceberg at all, but something else entirely. History dismissed these claims, but the voices of survivors remain haunting. As the minutes passed, the reality became impossible to deny. Titanic was sinking. The crew tried to organize lifeboats, but confusion ruled. The officers gave conflicting orders. Some lifeboats were lowered half-empty while hundreds waited on deck. The wealthy were given priority, while many third-class passengers were trapped below by locked gates. Some survivors later swore those gates were not only for control but also for silence, to keep certain people from escaping. Why? No one knows. The night grew colder. The stars still shone, but the air bit into the skin like knives of ice. The sea was calm, but it was merciless. People began to cry, to scream, to beg for safety. Mothers clutched their children, men argued with officers, and the band kept playing, their music both beautiful and tragic. The ship tilted further, its great decks now slanting like hills. Dishes slid from tables, furniture crashed, and still the people hesitated to believe the unthinkable, that the Titanic, the unsinkable, was dying. Yet through all of this chaos, certain passengers remained strangely calm. Survivors spoke of men in black coats who seemed to know what was happening. They moved with purpose, guiding some people to lifeboats while ignoring others. They whispered to each other, their faces cold and serious. Who were they? Why did they not panic like the rest? No records list their names, and after that night they vanished into history. As the bow of Titanic dipped deeper, panic finally took over. People pushed and fought for lifeboats. Some jumped into the freezing sea, their screams echoing across the still night. Others prayed, their voices rising into the stars. Officers fired shots to keep order, their guns cracking in the air. Yet still, many lifeboats were lowered half-empty, a decision that remains one of the greatest mysteries of that night. The ship's lights flickered as water rushed in. Survivors later described the final moments as unreal, like a nightmare. The great vessel split apart with a roar that shook the ocean. The stern rose high into the sky, black against the stars, before it crashed back into the sea and disappeared forever. Silence followed. The sea was filled with cries of the dying, then slowly, only the sound of the waves remained. The Titanic was gone, swallowed by the cold Atlantic. But what truly struck that night? Was it only an iceberg, or was there more to the story? The survivors' words do not all agree. The evidence does not all fit. The truth remains hidden beneath the ocean, guarded by the silence of the deep. And so, the night of the collision remains more than a tragedy. It remains a mystery that the world has never fully solved. The Titanic was gone, swallowed by the freezing Atlantic, but the story of that night did not end with the sinking. It continued with the desperate cries of more than 1,500 souls left floating in the icy waters, waiting for help that did not come in time. This part of the tragedy raises questions that have haunted historians and survivors ever since. Why did nearby ships fail to respond? Why did so many watch from the distance but never come to rescue? And why did silence cover the truth afterward? When Titanic struck the iceberg, the wireless operators sent out distress signals again and again. The code CQD was transmitted, followed by the new signal SOS. Ships across the Atlantic heard the cries for help, but many were too far to reach. Only one ship, the Californian, was close enough to make a difference. It was said to be less than 20 miles away, its lights visible on the horizon from Titanic's deck. Survivors remembered seeing that faint glow and believed salvation was near. They screamed, waved, and fired distress rockets into the night sky. But the Californian never came. The captain of the Californian later claimed his wireless operator was asleep and the crew thought the rockets were only fireworks from a celebration. But survivors never believed that story. How could a crew mistake desperate white rockets for a party? Some whispered that the Californian was not asleep but deliberately silent. The truth of that night may have been darker than official history admits. Even stranger was the account of another ship seen on the horizon. Survivors swore they saw a vessel closer than the Californian, watching the Titanic sink. Some claimed it stood motionless, lights dimmed, as if observing. But no ship ever admitted to being there. Was it a phantom ship? Or was it one whose identity was hidden to protect a secret mission? The silence of that unknown vessel has become one of Titanic's greatest mysteries. As the Titanic sank, those in the lifeboats rowed desperately toward the distant lights, shouting for the ship they believed was near. But the lights faded into the horizon, never moving closer. Hours passed, and the screams of the dying filled the night, a sound survivors later said would haunt them forever. The cold was merciless. Within minutes of entering the freezing water, people grew weak, their voices breaking into silence. Mothers clutched children until the waves swallowed them. Fathers begged for mercy as they slipped under the Black Sea. Still, no rescue came. Meanwhile, inside the few lifeboats, arguments broke out. Some wanted to return to pull more people from the water, but others refused, fearing the boats would be swamped. Many lifeboats drifted half-empty while hundreds drowned within reach. Survivors later admitted they lived with guilt for the rest of their lives. And yet, the greatest question remained: where was help? Where were the ships that had received the distress calls? When Carpathia finally arrived, it was already too late for most. Hours had passed, and the sea was quiet except for lifeboats carrying the lucky few. The Carpathia's crew pulled survivors aboard, their faces pale and broken. Some were too weak to speak, others whispered stories that seemed unbelievable. They spoke of seeing a ship nearby that never came, of hearing explosions inside the Titanic, of officers ordering silence. Some claimed they were warned not to repeat what they had witnessed. When the Carpathia reached New York, reporters crowded the survivors, demanding the truth. But many stories never reached the newspapers. Official reports focused only on the iceberg, ignoring the whispers of a ship that watched but never helped. Testimonies were cut short, and survivors who spoke too much were silenced by pressure from authorities. Why hide the truth? Perhaps to protect reputations. Perhaps to protect powerful men whose decisions doomed the ship. Or perhaps because Titanic's sinking was more than an accident, it was part of something larger. Survivors remembered how quickly officials rushed to close the investigation. The questions about the Californian's inaction were brushed aside. The unknown ship was dismissed as confusion. The conflicting reports of what struck Titanic were buried under the simple explanation of an iceberg. But the silence itself spoke louder than words. For if Titanic's sinking was only a tragic accident, why hide the details? Why silence the voices of those who saw too much? Even among the rescued, strange things happened. Some passengers with important names disappeared from records. Some claimed certain survivors were taken away quickly, questioned in private, and never spoke publicly again. Their stories never reached the world. And so, the rescue that should have been salvation became another part of the mystery. The screams in the night, the rockets in the sky, the nearby ship that never came, all remain questions that history refuses to answer. The missing rescue is not just a failure of duty. It may have been something deliberate, a choice made by unseen hands. And the silence that followed ensured the world would never know the full truth. What happened in those hours when Titanic cried for help? Why did the ships near her ignore her desperate call? And who decided that so many lives should be lost in the dark, freezing sea? The ocean swallowed the answers, but the suspicion remains. The tragedy of Titanic was not only in the sinking, it was in the silence of those who could have saved her but chose not to. When the Carpathia finally carried the survivors of Titanic to safety, the world expected to hear the full truth of what had happened in the icy Atlantic. But what emerged was not only sorrow, it was silence mixed with half-whispered stories. The survivors brought with them memories that were terrifying, strange, and often inconsistent with the official reports. Some spoke of locked rooms, guarded cargo, and mysterious passengers who vanished without a trace. Others swore they were told to keep quiet, to never speak of what they had really seen. These hidden stories became part of the legend, secrets carried by the living while the rest were buried beneath the sea. Survivors from the lower decks remembered something unusual during the voyage. They claimed certain areas of the ship were always locked, guarded by crew members who refused to answer questions. Crates marked with strange codes were stored in cargo holds, and rumors spread that valuable objects were being transported in secrecy. One man said he had seen crew unloading strange boxes during a stop before departure, boxes covered with thick canvas. He told others he believed the ship carried something more dangerous than anyone admitted. His testimony was never included in the official inquiry. In the lifeboats, while waiting for rescue, several passengers discussed the moments before the collision. Some said they heard more than the sound of an iceberg scraping against steel. They described muffled explosions, as if something inside the ship had burst apart. One woman said she saw smoke rising from the forward section before the final plunge. Others described a glow deep in the water, unnatural and frightening. When these details were shared later, officials dismissed them as fear-induced imagination. Yet too many voices repeated the same things for it to be coincidence. Another story came from a young steward who survived the sinking. He claimed that after the impact, officers ordered him to escort certain passengers directly to lifeboats, ignoring the usual rules of class and order. These passengers were not wealthy millionaires, but shadowy figures who traveled alone and spoke little. They carried small locked cases that they refused to abandon. The steward believed they were given priority because of what they carried, not who they were. He spoke of it once in an interview, but soon after he disappeared from public record, and his story was forgotten. Survivors also noticed how quickly silence spread once they reached safety. Some reported being approached by officials who told them not to repeat certain details. A woman who had seen the mystery ship on the horizon said she was told to describe it as a trick of the light. A man who spoke of explosions was advised that repeating such claims would only bring shame to the memory of the dead. Gradually, the strangest stories vanished from newspapers, replaced by the simple explanation of an iceberg and human error. Among the survivors were those who carried guilt, not only for living while others drowned, but for hiding what they knew. Letters written years later revealed confessions. One survivor admitted he had seen officers locking third-class passengers behind gates until it was too late. He said it was done not just to control the crowd, but to prevent certain people from escaping. Who were those people? Why were they held back? The survivor wrote that he never spoke of it during the investigation because he feared for his life. He died before anyone could ask him more. Children who survived grew up haunted by memories of that night. Some remembered men in black coats who guided them into boats but never gave their names. Others recalled passengers being pushed aside so these men could escape. These memories were dismissed as the confusion of young minds, but their details matched the accounts of adults who also saw shadowy figures on the ship. The band that played until the end became a symbol of bravery, but even among those who listened, there were strange accounts. Some said the music was meant to calm, but others whispered it was meant to cover the noise of something else happening below deck. The survivors who hinted at this were ignored, yet they remained convinced that the sinking was not only the result of nature but of design. Even on the Carpathia, survivors noticed unusual things. A few claimed that certain passengers were taken away quickly upon arrival, separated from the others. They did not appear in official lists, and their names were never recorded in newspapers. Who were they, and why were they hidden? Some believed these were the very people who carried the secrets of Titanic, rescued not for their lives but for what they knew. As years passed, survivors aged and passed away, but their hidden stories surfaced in letters, journals, and late confessions. The official history remained unchanged. Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. But behind that story was a darker layer told by those who lived through the terror. They spoke of guarded cargo, strange passengers, locked gates, missing rescues, and warnings that were ignored. And perhaps the most haunting detail of all, many said they were told to stay silent. Silence that lasted for decades, silence that still covers the real truth of that night. The survivors of Titanic did not all tell the same story, but together their voices form a chorus of suspicion. They believed the ship carried more than dreams. They believed lives were chosen to be lost. And they believed the truth was buried with the ship, hidden by those who had the power to control history. Their hidden stories remind us that Titanic's tragedy was not only about ice and steel, it was about secrets, silence, and a truth the world was never meant to hear. Years passed after the Titanic sank, but the questions did not fade. The ocean had claimed the ship, yet it had not silenced the suspicions. When explorers finally found the wreck in 1985, lying broken on the floor of the Atlantic, the discovery should have ended the mysteries. Instead, it created even more. What they saw in the wreck did not fully match the official story. The damage was strange, the evidence unsettling, and the silence of history seemed louder than ever. The Titanic was split into two great pieces, lying apart on the seabed. The steel plates were bent outward in places, as if an explosion had occurred inside. This confused researchers because an iceberg should have torn the plates inward. Some experts suggested that coal fires burning secretly in the ship's bunkers may have weakened the steel before the collision. Others argued that something more deliberate had happened. Survivors who spoke of explosions may not have been mistaken after all. Still, no one agreed, and the truth remained clouded. The cargo holds offered more mysteries. Manifests listed normal goods, mail, furniture, supplies, but investigators found signs that some items had been removed or were missing from the official record. Strange containers appeared to have been opened before the ship finally sank. What was taken? Who removed it? Some theorists believed the Titanic carried secret documents, inventions, or even gold. Others whispered that the voyage had been designed to eliminate certain passengers, powerful men who opposed financial empires of the time. The fact that several wealthy figures canceled their tickets at the last moment only deepened suspicion. Perhaps they knew something, or perhaps they were warned. As divers explored the ship, they also found areas sealed by collapsed steel that looked almost intentional, as if someone had tried to bury whatever was inside. These findings never made it into official reports. Instead, they were kept quiet, fueling the belief that Titanic still guards secrets in its silent grave. The stories of survivors began to sound different when compared with the wreck. Those who described glowing shadows, missing rescue ships, or men in black coats seemed less like dreamers and more like witnesses to a hidden truth. If their words had been ignored before, the strange evidence on the seabed gave them new weight. Yet even as more was discovered, answers were locked away. Governments and companies involved in the wreck's exploration restricted what was shown to the public. Photographs and reports were edited. Details were withheld. Researchers who pushed too hard found themselves silenced, their work buried like the ship itself. Why would simple wreckage require so much secrecy? Some suggested that the Titanic sinking was not a mere accident but part of a larger plan, a sacrifice hidden in history. The silence of the ocean seemed to protect that plan, swallowing both evidence and voices. But silence cannot erase memory. Survivors' families passed down their stories, stories of locked gates, ignored warnings, missing ships, and vanished passengers. These accounts may never be proven, yet together they form a shadow history that feels too heavy to dismiss. The Titanic became more than a shipwreck, it became a symbol of secrets hidden beneath water. In the years since, expeditions have returned again and again, bringing back pictures of rusted steel, broken chandeliers, and decaying cabins. But none have brought back the full truth. Every discovery raises more questions. Why did the ship break the way it did? Why do some areas show damage inconsistent with ice? Why were some artifacts removed before anyone knew the wreck's location? The ocean keeps its answers locked away, as if guarding the truth from human eyes. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that some truths were never meant to rise from the deep. For those who believe Titanic was more than a tragedy, the wreck is proof of silence, a grave built not only of steel and water but of secrets. For those who accept the official story, the wreck still whispers with unanswered questions. In both cases, Titanic remains a riddle, its final chapter unwritten. More than a century has passed, yet the fascination endures. People still ask, was it only an iceberg, or was there something more? Were the passengers victims of chance, or pawns in a larger design? Why did rescue never come in time, and why were survivors told to stay silent? The answers lie 2 miles beneath the surface, in the cold darkness where Titanic sleeps. And the ocean, vast and merciless, refuses to give them up. As long as the wreck remains, so too will the questions. The real truth of Titanic, the hidden secret of 1912, has not been solved. It waits in the silence of the deep, untouched by time, guarded by the sea. Perhaps one day the answers will rise. Or perhaps they will remain forever lost, buried with the ship that carried them into history. The Titanic was not just a ship of dreams. It was a ship of mysteries. And even now, more than a century later, those mysteries remain unsolved.